The ballroom of the Grand Meridian smelled like old money and fresh flowers. 300 guests in evening wear stood with champagne flutes raised, their faces tilted upward toward the stage where my mother was performing the greatest act of her life. She wore midnight blue silk and the expression of a woman who believed, genuinely believed, that she was doing something righteous. That was always the most terrifying thing about her. She never knew she was the villain. My name is Maya. I'm 31 years old. To my family, I'm the daughter who never quite fit too quiet, too serious, too obsessed with the fine print nobody wanted to read. To the biotech industry, I'm the attorney who built a patent wall so impenetrable that 3 Fortune 500 companies walked away from acquisition attempts rather than fight through it. My mother thought I filed paperwork for a living. She had no idea that the paperwork I filed had been quietly, methodically protecting a $47 million empire for the past 4 years. An empire she was about to hand to my brother. She tapped the microphone and the room settled. Tonight, she said, her voice rich with rehearsed warmth, is not just a celebration of your father's retirement. Tonight is about legacy, about continuity, about making sure that everything Wallace Chen built doesn't just survive, it thrives. My father stood to her left, looking smaller than I remembered. The Parkinson's had advanced faster than the doctors predicted, and retirement wasn't a choice he'd made so much as one the disease made for him. He smiled at the crowd with the patient dignity of a man who had accepted his season was ending. I loved him the way you love something you can't hold on to much longer. Completely. Helplessly. My brother Derek stood to my mother's right. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first car. His fiancée, Cassandra, pressed against his arm like a barnacle on a very expensive ship. Cassandra had sharp eyes and a sharper smile. The kind of woman who calculated net worth before she learned your last name. She had been angling for this moment for 2 years. I could see it in the way she gripped Derek's elbow, not affectionately, but the way a jockey grips the reins before the gate opens. It is my honor, my mother continued, reaching into the velvet portfolio on the podium, to announce that effective immediately, Wallace Chen is transferring full ownership of Helix Medical Technologies to our son, Derek Allen Chen. The room erupted. Derek threw his head back and laughed that big, performative laugh he'd been doing since Little League when he wanted adults to look at him. Cassandra covered her mouth with perfectly manicured fingers, eyes bright and calculating even in the pantomime of surprise. My father nodded slowly, smiling, because my mother had told him this was what he wanted. I didn't move. I stood near the back of the room with a glass of sparkling water. I don't drink at events where I need to think clearly, and I watched my mother produce a bound transfer agreement from the portfolio. 47 pages of corporate restructuring that she had commissioned from a firm in Boston that had no idea what they were actually handling. She hadn't asked me to review it. She hadn't told me it was coming. She had called me 3 weeks ago and asked if I was bringing a +1 to my father's retirement party. That was the extent of my involvement in the transfer of the company I had spent 4 years building from a 1-2 patent portfolio into the most legally protected medical device IP estate in the Mid-Atlantic region. Before I tell you how I watched the whole thing unravel without saying a single unnecessary word, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to know how far this story travels. I was not always composed about any of this. When I was 26, fresh out of law school with $180,000 in debt and a job offer from a patent boutique in Philadelphia, my father called me on a Tuesday night and asked me to come home. Not for dinner, for something serious. He sat me down at the kitchen table where we'd done homework for 20 years and slid a manila folder across to me. Inside was a letter from a competitor, a larger company alleging that 3 of Helix's core products infringed their existing patents. The damages exposure was $22 million. My father's company had 6 employees and a line of credit held together with optimism. My mother had been in the room. She'd looked at me with the specific brand of reluctant hope she reserved for situations where she needed something from me, but resented needing it. She said Dad thought maybe I could look at it. Just look. I looked. I spent 4 days reviewing every filing, every patent, every prior art reference. The competitor's claim was partially valid. 2 of the 3 products had exposure. I restructured the response, found prior art that hadn't been cited, and negotiated a licensing settlement that cost my father $340,000 instead of $22 million. My mother called it lucky. My father called it brilliant. He asked me to stay on as outside IP counsel. He asked me to build a proper patent program so this never happened again. And then he asked me something that I said yes to without fully understanding how much it would matter. He asked me to set up a holding company to own the IP separately from the operating company. For liability protection, he said. For flexibility, he said. For the family. I set up Meridian IP Holdings LLC. I filed 34 patents over the next 4 years. I registered 11 trademarks. I documented every trade secret in a system I designed myself. And because my father asked me to be the owner of record because at the time it made the most legal sense, because the holding company was supposed to be a family asset, I was stewarding every single piece of intellectual property that made Helix Medical Technologies worth $47 million, was owned by my LLC. By me. Helix operated under a license from Meridian, a license that renewed on the 1st of every month. I had not renewed it. I hadn't decided not to renew it 3 weeks ago when I found out about the transfer. I had decided not to renew it 4 years ago, when my father made me promise that the IP would stay protected no matter what happened to the company. I had built the license structure so that the holding company retained full control. I had done exactly what he asked me to do. My mother had never read the license agreement. My brother had never read the license agreement. When the Boston firm drafted the transfer documents, they confirmed the existence of the Meridian license in a single footnote on page 31, and noted that it would need to be transferred or renegotiated as part of the acquisition process. My mother had not read page 31. Derek had not read page 31. Cassandra had definitely not read page 31, but she had read every line of the sections detailing the company's revenue figures, and I had watched her do it across a dinner table 2 months ago while she thought I was looking at my phone. I focused on Cassandra now as my mother finished her announcement, and the room swelled with applause. Cassandra was already leaning into Derek, whispering something, her eyes on the transfer documents on the podium. Her hand found his wrist. It was not the touch of someone celebrating with a partner. It was the touch of someone trying to close a deal before the market moved. I understood corporate raiders. I prosecuted IP theft for a living. I knew exactly what Cassandra saw when she looked at Helix Medical Technologies. $47 million in assets, a retiring founder with diminished capacity, and a fiancé who had never once worked a full week in his professional life, but had a very attractive inheritance trajectory. A woman who loves a man looks at his face when something good happens. A woman who loves his balance sheet looks at the paperwork. Cassandra was looking at the paperwork. I reached into my clutch and found my phone. I had 2 unread messages. One from my paralegal, Dominique. One from my outside litigation partner, James Whitfield, who had been on standby since 9 that morning. Dominique's message said, "License lapse, confirmed as of midnight. Meridian Council has been notified. Enforcement position is clean." James's message said, "We're ready when you are." I put the phone back. I took a sip of sparkling water. The bubbles were sharp and cold and felt like clarity. My mother found me near the floral arrangement by the east wall. She moved through the crowd with the focused efficiency of someone who had decided that any obstacle between her and her objective was a problem to be managed, not a person to be considered. She gripped my arm above the elbow not warmly and steered me toward a service corridor behind the catering station. "You have a look on your face," she said, her voice very quiet and very precise. "I need you to fix it." "I'm not sure which look you mean," I said. "I have several." She did not find that funny. "This is your father's night. This is Derek's night. I need you to go back in there, congratulate your brother, and be a part of this family for once in your life." "I'm always part of this family," I said. "I've been part of this family for 4 years of IP filings, 3 patent litigations, 2 licensing negotiations, and approximately $2.3 million in foregone billing rates, because I invoiced Dad at cost." Her jaw tightened. She had the look she got when numbers were involved, and she didn't want to engage with them. Numbers, to my mother, were weapons the practical-minded used to win arguments that should be decided by feeling. She believed, deeply, that fairness was a matter of instinct rather than accounting. And her instincts had always told her that Derek needed more. "Derek has struggled," she said. "You know that. The consulting firm didn't work out. The restaurant concept didn't work out. He's tried, Maya. He has tried, and he keeps getting knocked down, and you just keeps—" She gestured at me, a frustrated wave that seemed to indicate my general existence as an affront. "You keep succeeding. You have your firm. You have your clients. You have everything you built for yourself. Derek needs this. He needs a foundation. He needs something to be his. And you decided that something should be Dad's company. I decided that family assets belong to the family. Your father built Helix for his children. It was always supposed to go to both of you, but you don't need it. You've made that very clear. You're too busy to come to Sunday dinners. You're too important to take Derek's calls." "Derek called me once in the last 2 years," I said. "He asked me to write him a letter of recommendation for a country club." She pressed forward. She wasn't listening. She never listened when the narrative she'd constructed conflicted with information from the outside world. "What I'm asking you to do is be gracious. Sign as a witness to the transfer. Stand next to your brother and let this family move forward." She produced a pen from her clutch. Gold-plated. She held it out to me. I looked at the pen. I looked at her. I felt the old familiar pull, the need to smooth things over, to give her what she wanted so the temperature would drop and we could all go back to pretending that this family made sense. I had been managing that pull since I was 12 years old. It had cost me more than I could ever bill for. But I also felt something else, colder and more useful. The precise, pressurized calm I felt in deposition rooms, when the other side had just walked into something they couldn't see yet. "You're right," I said. Her shoulders dropped. Air moved out of her in a quiet rush of relief. She thought she had landed the plane. Derek should have something to build on. This is a big night. I took the pen. "Let's make sure everything is in order." She smiled. It was the smile of a woman who had always believed that a firm enough hand could organize the world into the shape she preferred. She touched my cheek once, brisk. proprietary, and guided me back into the ballroom. Derek was at the head table with the transfer documents spread before him. Cassandra was standing at his shoulder. They both looked up when I approached, and I watched the same cautious calculation move across Derek's face. He had never entirely trusted my pleasantness. We had grown up in the same house. He knew what it looked like when I was simply agreeing with you, and he knew what it looked like when I was agreeing with you while doing something else entirely. But Cassandra wanted to close this, and Cassandra's impatience was faster than Derek's instincts. Maya, Cassandra said, her smile arranged perfectly. Isn't this wonderful? Your dad's legacy is staying in the family. It absolutely is, I said. I looked at my brother. I think you should sign tonight, Derek. Don't let this drag on. Get it done. He searched my face. He didn't find what he was looking for, which was some indication that I was not okay with this. He found nothing. I had spent 4 years in high-stakes IP litigation. Juries had looked at my face during closing arguments and found nothing I didn't put there on purpose. His caution lost to his greed. It always does. Yeah, he said, reaching for the pen. Yeah, you're right. Let's do it. Cassandra squeezed his shoulder. He bent over the document. I watched him sign his full name, Derek Allen Chen, on the ownership transfer line. I watched Cassandra exhale. I watched my mother, who had come to stand nearby, press her hands together in front of her chest like a woman at a prayer. I watched Derek cap the pen and set it down. He looked up at me with something in his eyes that I recognized, with a flicker of sadness, as triumph. Done, he said. Done, I agreed. He didn't know what he had just signed. He thought he had just accepted a $47 million company. He had actually accepted a shell, a corporate entity whose only meaningful assets were operating rights to intellectual property that were now, as of midnight, unlicensed. He owned the car. I owned the engine. Without my engine, his car was a very expensive piece of furniture. My mother raised her glass. To Derek, she announced to the table, her voice pitched to Carrie. To the future of Helix Medical Technologies and the Chen family legacy. The table applauded. Actually, I said. My voice was quiet. It didn't need to be loud. The table heard it the way you hear a creak in a floor before it gives way. My mother turned to me with a look that said she would not forgive what came next. Before we celebrate, I said, placing my phone face up on the table. I need to make a quick call. It'll only take a moment. Maya. Her voice was a warning wrapped in silk. It's fine, I said. I tapped the speaker icon. James, are you there? The voice that came through was the voice of a man who had been in courtrooms for 30 years and had learned to sound completely unremarkable while saying catastrophic things. I'm here, Maya. Good evening. Can you confirm the current status of the Meridian IP Holdings license agreement with Helix Medical Technologies? A brief pause. The table had gone very still. The operating license between Meridian IP Holdings and Helix Medical Technologies lapsed at midnight on the 1st of this month. No renewal was filed. As of this morning, Meridian's counsel has sent formal notice of lapse to Helix's registered corporate address. The notice documents that any continued manufacture, sale, or distribution of products covered under the Meridian patent portfolio constitutes infringement. That portfolio currently covers 34 active patents core to Helix's product line. Cassandra's expression didn't crumble. It crystallized. She was smart enough to understand what she'd just heard before she was emotionally ready to feel it. Derek was not as fast. What is that? He asked, looking at my phone as if it had done something to him personally. What does that mean? What is a Meridian license? It means, I said, that Helix Medical Technologies cannot legally manufacture or sell its core product line without a license from Meridian IP Holdings. I paused. Which is my company, Derek. Has been for 4 years. Dad set it up that way to protect the IP from liability exposure. It's in the operating agreement you would have found on page 31 of the transfer documents. The silence at the table had taken on a different quality. Not the polite hush of a formal occasion. The paralyzed silence of people trying to catch up to what has already happened. My mother set her glass down. Something moved in her face, the first fracture in the composure she'd been building for this night for months. This is a mistake, she said. James, this is a misunderstanding. The license is part of the company. It transfers with the company. Mrs. Chen, James said, with the specific gentleness of someone explaining something very bad to someone who isn't going to like it. The license is held by a separate entity. It doesn't transfer automatically. It would require Meridian's consent and a negotiated assignment. Meridian hasn't consented. Then tell her to consent, Cassandra said sharply. She looked at me. There was no pretense left in it. Whatever warmth she'd been performing evaporated completely. She looked at me the way she actually looked at me, without the filter. And what I saw underneath was someone who had planned very carefully around an asset they'd never properly investigated. Maya. Her voice was very controlled. This can be fixed tonight. We can do a consent and assignment right here. Have James draft it. Get it notarized. That would require Meridian to agree to terms, I said. Meridian's terms aren't set by me alone. I'd need to convene the managing members, review the consideration being offered, Assess whether licensing or assignment serves Meridian's investment position more effectively. I looked at her steadily. That's not a tonight conversation. Derek stood up from his chair. He had gone from triumph to something that looked like a man standing on a surface that was no longer solid. So what are you saying? I signed the transfer and the company is worth nothing? The company is worth exactly what its assets are worth, I said. Its equipment, its client contracts, its staff. It's a functioning operation. But its ability to sell its primary product line is currently dependent on IP it doesn't own and doesn't have a license to use. That's a material fact that would have come up in any standard due diligence process. I looked at my mother when I said it. She understood what I meant. She had skipped due diligence because she'd thought she was moving family property within a family, and rules were for people who didn't trust each other. She had forgotten that trust is not a substitute for reading the documents. Madison, she started. Then she caught herself. An old habit. She'd called me by the wrong name since I was a child. She always called me the name that came to mind first, and the name that came to mind first was always the child she was thinking about. Maya, you can't do this. This is your father's retirement. This is his legacy. You would sabotage your own father's legacy to what? Punish Derek? Punish me? I haven't sabotaged anything, I said. The structure that exists tonight is the same structure that existed 4 years ago when Dad asked me to build it. The license lapsed because I didn't renew it. I didn't renew it because 3 weeks ago, I learned that a major corporate transaction affecting Meridian's primary licensee was being planned without my knowledge, without Meridian's knowledge, and without any consultation about whether the IP could or would transfer. We assumed, my mother started. You assumed, I said. You assumed the IP was part of the company because it was easier than asking. You assumed I would be fine with it because it was easier than telling me. You assumed Derek was entitled to it because it has always been easier for you to assume Derek is entitled to things. I didn't say it loudly. I didn't need to. Assumptions aren't legal instruments, Mom. I know that probably seems like a technicality. It's not. Derek had been very still for the past minute. I watched something work through him, the progression from anger, through the impulse to attack something, and finally, into the flat plane of someone who has come to the edge of a situation they can't bluster through. He picked up the transfer documents. Both of his hands were on the pages. I watched him look at Cassandra, who gave him the slightest shake of her head, don't. He looked back at the documents. He looked at me. He set the documents back down. What do you want? He asked, quietly. More quietly than I had heard him speak since we were children. I want exactly what I've always wanted, I said. To make sure Helix can operate. To make sure Dad's company survives. That's why I spent 4 years building the IP program in the first place. That's what I agreed to do. I picked up my phone and took it off speaker. I'll call you Monday, James, thank you. I put the phone in my clutch. I looked at my mother, who was standing with her arms crossed over her chest, looking at a point somewhere past my left shoulder. Her face had closed like a door. The license can be restructured, I said. If Derek wants to run Helix, I'm willing to negotiate a proper long-term license with terms that work for both entities. A real agreement, one that a lawyer reviews, one that protects everyone. I paused. But that conversation happens on a Monday morning in a conference room. Not tonight. And not with a pen someone handed me while I was being told to smile. I put the gold pen down on the table between us. My mother found me at the coat check 20 minutes later. She had moved through her emotional register in record time. She'd arrived at a stop somewhere between fury and desperation, and she toggled between them as she spoke, her voice low and controlled in the way it gets when she's afraid of being overheard. She said I had humiliated her. She said I had humiliated Derek. She said I had used a legal technicality to blow up her husband's retirement party and that I needed to understand that what I had done tonight could not be undone, and that the family would not recover from it, and that if I got in that car and drove away without fixing what I had broken, she would never forgive me. I looked at her for a moment. I thought about the college scholarship applications she'd forgotten to mail because she was helping Derek prep for his soccer tryouts. I thought about the summer internship I'd lost because she'd borrowed my car without asking and returned it 2 days late. I thought about the Sunday 4 years ago when my father sat across from me at the kitchen table, scared and sick and needing someone he could trust, and I had said yes without hesitation. I had said yes to all of it, the work, the responsibility, the years of being invisible in this family's story, because I loved my father, and I was capable of the work, and someone had to do it. I thought about all of that, and I did not say any of it. The license lapsed. Mom, I said. That's not a technicality. That's the situation. Derek signed the transfer documents, and now he owns a company that needs to come to the table and negotiate operating rights. That can happen. That's a solvable problem. The difference between tonight and Monday morning is 20 cups of coffee and some calmer people in the room. You planned this? She said. I prepared, I said. There's a difference. You taught me to be prepared. You just thought that skill would always be used in your direction. She stared at me. The fury was still there, but something was shifting underneath it, the first, unwilling signs of a woman beginning to reckon with the possibility that she had not, in fact, read the situation correctly. My mother was not stupid. She had just spent 60 years in a version of the world where her instincts were sufficient and the people around her were manageable. It took a specific kind of disruption to introduce her to the limits of that world. I had apparently provided it. "You could have told me," she said. Her voice was different now. Something had gone out of it. "You could have picked up the phone and told me the IP was in a separate company. You could have warned me." "I found out 3 weeks ago that you were doing this," I said. "I found out the same way everyone outside this family would have found out, through a mutual acquaintance who heard about the announcement at a luncheon. You didn't tell me. You didn't ask me. You didn't think there was anything to ask about, because it never occurred to you that what I do for a living might be relevant to what you were planning." She looked away. The coat check attendant materialized, professionally oblivious, and handed me my coat. I put it on. "The company is fine," I said. One more time, because I meant it, and because my father's life work was inside it, and that mattered to me, independent of everything else. Derek can run it, if he actually wants to run it, and not just hold the title of running it. The license negotiation is a formality. I'm not trying to strip the company bare. I'm trying to be treated like a party with standing in decisions that affect my legal interests. That's it. She didn't answer. I walked out through the lobby. The valet brought my car. The night air was cold and clear and very still, and I stood next to my open car door for a moment and looked at the sky, which was the blue-black of late evening in a city that never went fully dark. My phone buzzed. "Dominique, everything documented. You doing okay?" I typed back, "Yeah, heading home." I got in the car. I sat for a second in the silence, which felt different from the silence inside, full instead of empty, settled instead of waiting. For most of my adult life, I had operated as though the way to survive my family was to be more useful to them than I was costly. To be the one who could always be called on, who would always come through, who would do the work that needed doing, and accept invisibility as the price. I had told myself this was generosity. I had told myself it was love. It was both of those things. It was also, I understood now, a strategy built on a fundamental miscalculation, the belief that if I was indispensable enough, they would eventually notice, that if I did enough, they would eventually see it. That invisibility was a temporary condition with a logical endpoint somewhere ahead. There is no endpoint. Invisible people stay invisible until they do something that cannot be ignored. Not because they lack value, because the people looking have never developed the habit of looking for them. I had spent 4 years quietly building something real. Tonight, for the first time, I let it be seen. I pulled out of the parking garage and drove north on the interstate with the windows down and the radio off. The city fell away behind me. The skyline got smaller in my mirrors. I didn't feel like celebrating. I didn't feel like replaying it. I felt the particular, exhausted clarity of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had finally put it down in the right place. My father would hear about it tomorrow. We would have a real conversation, probably the most honest one we'd had in years. He would understand, because he had built the structure himself and he had trusted me to steward it. And somewhere in the fog of the last year, he had let my mother convince him that stewardship was the same as surrender. Derek would call. He would be angry for a while, and then, if Cassandra had done her math correctly, he would be strategic. The license negotiation would happen. I would be fair because fairness was the basis of a document that would hold up, and I had never built anything that didn't hold up. My mother would need more time. My mother always needed more time. She would get it. I drove. The highway opened up past the suburbs and the stars got clearer, and I turned the radio on something instrumental, something that didn't need anything from me. I breathed all the way out, the way you can only breathe when you're alone and the performance is finally over. I had walked into that ballroom as the invisible daughter. I had walked out as the managing member of the entity that owned every patent that made the family empire worth having. Nothing about me had changed tonight. Nothing had been revealed that wasn't already true. The only thing that shifted was that they could no longer afford not to see it. My phone lit up on the seat, a text from a number I didn't recognize. I glanced at it at a red light. It was Cassandra. "I think we got off on the wrong foot tonight. I'd love to buy you coffee. I have a feeling we could actually work really well together." I put the phone face down on the seat. I drove home. I parked in my own driveway and sat in the quiet and let the silence belong to me. For the first time in 4 years, it did.